Okay, thank you again for all those who have joined us. This is the AssistRx webinar series, Leading the Market in a Rapidly Changing Patient Solutions Landscape. My name is Bridget Brennan, and I am the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications at AssistRx. I'll be your moderator for each of the 4 panel-based webinars in this series. Today, we're holding our second installment of the series, Factors to Consider Before Investing in a Tech-Enabled Hub Model. Now we'll have our panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with Jan.
Hi, my name is Jan Nielsen, and I'm the Division President for Patient Solutions. So I'm responsible for reimbursement services that utilizes advanced benefit investigations, as well as PA, appeal support, financial assistance, copay, adherence, both in the call center as well as using video conferencing, and then within the field environment, face-to-face. Also have reporting up through me our non-commercial pharmacy, supporting all aspects of free drug. I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Robbins, Vice President of Business Development with a background in patient services and technology. And my role is responsible for aligning the appropriate solutions with our business partners' brand strategy. Thank you for joining us today. Dustin?
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Dustin Ferguson. I lead corporate strategy for AssistRx. I focus most of my time on driving critical growth initiatives across the organization, work on forming new external partnerships, as well as a lot of time with our product team, aligning our product roadmaps with our organization's strategic plan.
Great, thank you. Before we dive into today's panel, I want to orient all of you, our audience, to our Zoom meeting platform. If you have questions for our panelists throughout the session, we welcome you to submit them at any time. So what you'll do is click the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom window, input your questions, and we'll answer all questions at the end. So let's get started. There are many kinds of tech-enabled hubs out there. Some started as a call center, then added technology later. Others may have started as a health tech org and then added a call center later. And then there are those that were acquired by or merged with another organization that already offered the complementary tech or talent services. And lastly, there are hubs that sit under larger organizations that have dedicated divisions like distribution, compliance, or clinical trials. With so many competing types of hubs offering different technologies, the first question I want to pose to the group is, there are several approaches to providing a tech-enabled hub. Some are more robust than others. How do you define a tech-enabled hub? And we'll start with Kevin.
A tech-enabled hub is one that leverages technology to drive process, outcomes, and adherence. It allows their staff to focus on people. And when we talk about outcomes, traditionally we focus on just reimbursement outcomes, but it's important to stratify patients to both commercial coverage, non-commercial coverage, and streamline the process on the back end so that the patients and payers that need that white glove or more manual services can be focused on by staff, and we can automate as much as the back end solutions as possible. We can also have targeted connectivity to both the patients and prescribers by technology-driven solutions and touch points. We also want to make,
I'm sorry, Kevin. A couple of things that I really want to step in on and talk about with tech before we go too much further is that tech can bring transparency to the table. So it allows us to see what's happening at every single status, if you would, or task, the time frame wrapped around that, as well as the quality. What is happening at that moment? Is it meaningful? Is it not meaningful? Or are there too many steps to it? Including, even capturing what's happening on the screen as someone is walking through an enrollment form, et cetera. All of these things can be facilitated by tech, including recording of calls, picking up specific words or verbiage that they're looking for as you do call calibrations, et cetera. So those are a couple things that I'd like to add. And then I'm just going to kick it back over to Dustin to see what his thoughts are around this.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the focus really should be on using tech to drive SOPs rather than having SOPs drive tech. What I mean by that is rather than having people decide when to click a button to run a certain service, You need to have the system set up to automate those decisions of like running an ABV or an EBV or other services where the technology is really driving the process. That way you have people kind of handle the exceptions down the line, and it frees them up so that they can focus on delivering empathy and really building relationships with the patients. So from a SisterRx perspective, we focus on utilizing integrations to minimize things like swivel chairs. We try to stay agnostic, or we do stay agnostic, I shouldn't say try, we do stay agnostic so that clients can use the pieces and parts that they want for their program, and that's across the industry, as well as spend time on speed, but also on accuracy along with that. All of that kind of combined is where we really see tech power people.
And Bridget, based on that overview, you can see how a tech-enabled hub can be valuable, whether it's a new launch, whether it's a transitioning program, but also in the areas where there's misconceptions, where maybe in major medical, rare disease, or orphan products, where historically people have thought that tech-enabled hubs might not be the right solution with them. Where it can drive process efficiencies makes it value added regardless of where the product is in the life cycle or the demographics that that product supports.
Great point, Kevin. It's interesting that you mentioned EBV and different technologies to drive process. That actually leads us to our next question. It's critical to dig into technology offered by each patient solutions provider to make sure you're making the right investment when you select your partner. So from artificial intelligence or AI, machine learning and API integrations, as Dustin, you talked about, to what we touched on, what you touched on, Kevin, about EBV. And there are other solutions out there like real-time pharmacy benefit and advanced benefit verification. It is critical that manufacturers look under the hood and really get into the details of that technology. So my next question for our panelists: what kinds of technologies are offered by patient solutions providers or hubs? And what are the differences between them? Let's start with Jan.
Great, and thank you, Bridget, because one of the things that I want to make sure that I call out, and that is the term AI, artificial intelligence. I hear this bantered around, one, by my peers out here in patient solution world, as well as from manufacturers. And what I really believe happens is the loss of that information of what AI really is. AI is historical data. All well and good, it definitely can support any of us and all of us in certain aspects. But when doing reimbursement services, really need to have a real-time aspect and feedback solution that is bringing you back that information versus something based on historical claims. AI can be used in your launch strategy, really figuring out what payers may or may not do, et cetera. But when you get down to a real advanced benefit investigation, there needs to be real-time information coming back. One, that your patient solutions organization can facilitate or swivel chair or communicate back with the payer around or the physician or the patient, but it has to be real-time and it has to be clear. And I know my colleagues, Kevin, for example, has a different aspect on some of this information.
Yeah, and to piggyback on some of Jan's points on artificial intelligence, it does bring value. And in the first question, I kind of tackled process outcomes and adherence. And I kind of take that first and third bucket of process and adherence. I think it can do great things around measuring your process flows and evaluating both those and the quality aspects of your program, so that as you make tweaks and changes once your program is up and running and you do have the data to make strategic decisions on certain terms to use or certain tweaks that need to be made within your process flow. Same thing with adherence. AI is great for measuring targeted touch points. So what type of interactions with patients that have certain risk profiles helps their adherence levels, and which ones are you not seeing the results where maybe a different communication strategy works. But exactly to Jan's point on outcomes, do you want to use historical models at an individual patient level to predict their coverage? And that's where we have some concerns. To Jan's point, having a direct API or connectivity into a payer system, getting the result out of it, and having an accurate real-time data element to provide to a patient and provider gets the patient onto the right product and sets expectations on what needs to happen. There's other solutions besides AI. To your point, Bridget, there's test claims, which I think a lot of times get confused as real-time benefit checks. That just happened in a conversation that I had yesterday. Test claims, we all work with expensive, high-cost products. It's almost always going to require a prior authorization. When you run a test claim, that's all it's going to tell you until there's a prior authorization on file, which means it brings no value for your new patients or your patients that don't have a PA executed by your hub, the office, or the SP. The other piece is real-time benefit checks. I know that was a hot term in the industry for a little while. Often it'll tell the office or it'll tell the end user that it's not covered just because a PA was required, or there's a cheaper product that's available that the payer would require you to use. Maybe if you're in a busy class or a formulary that has generics on it, it's going to tell you a product that's covered and requires a PA isn't covered, so that you try the generics or you try the softer PAs. So you want to make sure that you understand the pros and cons of all of these solutions.
Thank you, Kevin. Speaking of pros and cons, let's talk about the evolution of your hub program and how the right technology can evolve alongside your organization and the product as it evolves in its life cycle. We've seen a trend in the industry of more manufacturers taking some aspects of their hubs internal or taking a hybrid approach from the start. And while each kind of hub model, specifically outsourced, hybrid, and insourced models, they all have their merits. But the question I'd like to pose to the group is, what would you consider when deciding on the type of hub model your organization will pursue? And how do you go about finding the right vendor? We'll start with Dustin.
Yeah, I think that the most important item when going through the process of finding the right vendor is finding one that is not only willing to, but also able to evolve with you. Even if you're looking to potentially move from an outsourced model to an internal model or a hybrid model, you don't want to pick a partner that won't let you move their tech internal or that will just price you out of it so that it's not attainable, are the same thing. You need to make sure that the vendor you choose has a tech platform that really allows you flexibility so that as you move into the future, you have some options, that it can be taken either in-source or outsourced, like I mentioned. And then, just one word of caution I would give is that these platforms can get really customized. I've seen some programs in the past build a really unique and super customized CRM platform that only kind of keeps them boxed in down the road. So as you're going through this process, make sure that you focus on the platform's flexibility from day one, rather than realizing a few years down the road that was something that you need.
No, those are great points, Dustin. And then one of the things that I would like to comment on is when looking at an organization that you are going to, one, partner with, that it's hopefully a very long-term relationship, is, as we've already heard from Dustin, is looking at the aspect to support you through the life cycle of your drug. But the other thing to consider is, what's your portfolio look like? Are you going to put multiple drugs into this environment, as you invest into it? What is the cost? What are you willing to spend? Where are you looking to have a return on investment? And there's some great opportunities utilizing tech and then marrying talent up with that information. But really, what's the reporting capabilities? What is the information that you can get out? Is there an opportunity to look at it at all different aspects? So one, from your field reimbursement team, from your national accounts, looking at payer information, average copays, your specialty pharmacy distribution, or even your retail. What is occurring through this data, and what can you get back through this organization that is facilitating your organization and your distribution model? Kevin, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think the only thing to add is going back to both of your points. I think Dustin set the table well. Are there the transparency and the culture? So not only the technology system to be able to attach to it, but to Jen's point, as you're adding pieces to your decision-making process, what's the pros and cons of those? What's the vendor's experience? What do they recommend? How does that compare to your notes as you're doing your own vendor analysis and solutions analysis? There is pros and cons. I don't think there's one silver bullet to any of the industry challenges. I think everyone watching that knows this. So what are the different pieces that your partner uses to fill those gaps? And then which demographics does it hit and which ones doesn't it? And then that way, when you're going out and making your evaluations, you can compare notes. It should be consultative in those communications and transparent, regardless of the model that you're selecting.
It's interesting. I hear transparency, I hear culture, and I hear consultative when thinking of the right partner. And we've talked about this in other questions too. You really want that consultative partner. It's critical to make sure that you find the right fit for you and your organizations. And the partner you choose, they should be able to counsel you throughout the product lifecycle. They should be able to integrate technology to drive process, whether it's an in-sourced, outsourced, or hybrid hub model. And they should be able to counsel you through the transition from one model to the other model. That leads us to our next topic. Where your product is in its life cycle will greatly impact how you support your stakeholders at each stage. So in general, you'll want to provide education and authorization services early in the life cycle to raise awareness of what support programs there are and how to access them. Then you'll want to convert and streamline the product, streamline processes for the product mid-life cycle. And you want to do that to create efficiencies and drive program health. And then lastly, at the end of the product life cycle, we all know this, you want to differentiate your product from market entrants or competitors, and you want to maintain that brand loyalty. I'm not the expert on this, so I'll let the panelists get into more details. So our final question for today's session is, based on your experience, which technology should be integrated into the program and at what points throughout the product life cycle? Kevin, would you like to start?
Sure, there's two terms that I'm going to use to start this topic. One is going to be stratification and the other one is going to be satisfaction. So the two big S's. One, you need to understand your patient and provider demographic and the patient's life flow and the doctor's workflow. Often we just assume that there's two for the doctor, but just like patients where, based on your demographics, you may have some that are tech savvy, or you may have, your product may have a lot of caregivers, or maybe they're older and they do want to spend time talking on the phone and being confident with every interaction with your patient services team, or maybe even with every fill. You have to consider how you're going to connect with them through your manual and your technology flows to make sure 80% are using technology, that you also have that white glove customer service that's very easy to access for the patients who don't prefer those pieces. And the same things for your doctor's offices. And then after you set up these tools, we know that as you roll things out, you're constantly learning new things. You're hearing information from the field, or you're getting feedback from your patient solutions partner. And then you're always making little tweaks, which is why that satisfaction piece is very important. You almost don't want to hear the information from your field first. You want to have those proactive touch points, whether it's surveys or other interactions with both your patients and prescribers, to see how you can continue to tweak those points. So if you do roll out a new technology solution, you want to constantly gain feedback on the little tweaks and nuances that you can improve it to drive a positive experience to your technology rollout.
So Kevin, I think those are excellent points, but one of the things I want to caution pharmaceutical organizations again about the technology aspect is we have to solve for the present model that is there in place, whether that's going to be coming through a fax enrollment, et cetera. But the organization that you're going to partner with to offer solutions through needs to demonstrate and walk through a plan of action that can help convert those offices and patients in order to move on to technology platforms, and for them to actually demonstrate that through either past experiences, case models, testimonial support from current organizations that they are servicing. All of these things the manufacturer should ask for to really understand what's occurring. And then the other piece, not every launch is going to go perfectly, as we well know. There's always hiccups. So where's the transparency coming through? And what has been that hub organization's focus around transparency? through their data, through the talent that they may be assigned to your program, are they showing quality initiatives? Are they showing improvement? Are they giving more insight? As well as continuing to upgrade on the technology side as that technology comes into play. Those are my thoughts anyway.
I agree with you guys. And I'll just add that while you may use the same technology services in your program as time goes on, that over time, you do need to evolve how you use them, depending on where you're at in your life cycle, right? So like ABV may not give you a full answer at launch, right? It'll give you that a formulary decision hasn't been made yet. That's useful because then you can set that patient up to continually check in the background and try to find coverage once that determination has been made. Because while you're early on in your life cycle, you're focused on getting as many patients on therapy as quickly as you can. But as you get halfway or 2/3 through it, it changes to retaining patients that are adherent. So at that point, you need to focus on re-verification and focus on not losing patients as their plans reset. And then also keep in mind that it also can vary by brand position as well. So someone who's worked really hard to get a good formulary position can get a ton of value out of EPA, for example. It's likely automated, it's approved most of the time. But then if you're a brand who is heavily step edited, you need to pick a different approach and find a vendor who can kind of walk you through and give you that consultation on how to best serve those patients, because EPA is just not going to work in those areas as well.
And then Dustin, to that point, the one piece that I really feel is important is for a hub organization such as ourselves to be totally transparent as to where is it appropriate to put FTEs, and then where can technology support either those FTEs, or can you eliminate those FTEs completely and support technology through that specific task or environment. So I think those are all things that need to come into play.
Great, thank you all for sharing these points. We have just a few minutes left in our webinar today, and I see we have a few questions from the audience, so let's start the Q&A. Okay, so the first question I see is, how do you vet whether or not a hub provider takes a consultative approach? So that's a good question. Dustin, do you want to take this one?
Sure. My answer is really pretty simple. Personally, I would just try to talk to as many people as I possibly could. If I was in pharma's shoes, I would want to talk to frontline individuals. I would want to talk to, kind of middle tier individuals within the organization to really test the organization's bench strength, and really just try to have a lot of conversations to try to uncover, turn over as many stones as I can within that organization.
No, and if I could also jump in on that, a couple of things. I would also ask that group that is presenting before you to come up with different types of solutions, even through the RFP process, so that that consultative mode is being demonstrated. And Dustin brought up some great points around talking to as many individuals as possible, mid-level, et cetera, because I address this as a marriage. And one of the things you need to look at, marriages are created on collaboration and working well. Good marriages are anyway. And so these are the things that you really want to understand. Is there a willingness to continually improve? Or are they always going to be pointing their finger that it's your problem or it's another organization within your distribution process, et cetera, that's causing the issue? And will they own their problem? Do they have a history of owning their problem and being transparent? So I think those are key components to really understanding how do you really understand what type of a hub organization you're working with.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is that consultative approach should be throughout your interactions with them. Whether it's throughout the first time you're considering them as a partner, through the day-to-day or monthly and quarterly interactions once your program is up and running and you're having those regular touch points, through your decision-making process of your strategy for your patient service solutions, whether it's ramping up and down solutions, expanding, or taking some of those pieces in-house. There should be a level of transparencies, recommendations, and that whole consultative approach that started your question, Bridget.
Thank you, Kevin. Jan, I love that point. Good marriage. That was great. So I see another question here. What if you have a portfolio of products in different disease states and at different stages in their product life cycle? What hub model works best here? We'll start off with Jan.
Great, thank you. You know, again, the manufacturer needs to do due diligence, and that's back within their own organization. If I can really make a strong recommendation on that. And what I mean is, what are the types of products do you want to solve for? Technology can step in and offer up so many different types of solutions for drugs that are in different life cycles. So I would say definitely don't go the cookie cutter approach, but there are opportunities. Back to what Dustin said earlier, don't overbuild. Look for an opportunity that you can utilize the services over and over again. And you can stand up alike services even across a very diverse portfolio. For example, when you get into copay solutions, there's an opportunity to stand up alike drugs. I mean, excuse me, alike rules, and to utilize that aspect. The same with patient adherence, signing up for patient education, et cetera. There can be a different cycle around the types of education that's being provided. But as far as signing up for it, patient signature, e-enrollment, all of these things can be more alike than not, still solving for a very diverse portfolio. Let me turn it back to my teammates and see what else their thoughts are.
Yeah, and there's obviously some disease states like oncology that are very self-serve, and you want to be able to provide the tools and pick the partner that can hit those. But then you might have another product that can hit those offices, but you might have another product that's rare disease that's used to manual solutions that need to be educated, that need to be walked through. So how can they scale up and down? Do they have nursing services and the ability to service those programs, or are you going to have to outsource those things? And that all goes back to Jan's original point on your internal strategy. Do you want to have one partner that does all of those processes well? Or do you want to select a partner that's really good in one space and a different partner in another space? Some of those can be challenges that you want to make sure that you're aligned, but that your partner's also providing you recommendations and how they best support those areas. And then to Dustin's original point on the last, talking to the teams that have helped in those disease states and what their strategies would be. That kicking the tires analysis is so important. Bridget?
Jeremy and Bridget.
Sorry about that. We do have one last question. I'm hoping we can quickly get through this one and then we'll close for today. So the question is, if you're considering transitioning your product from an outsourced hub to a hybrid model, what's most important to look for in a hub vendor? Jan, can you take this one real quick?
Yeah, so one is for a manufacturer to decide what they really want to own. And to me, the most important aspect is the relationship with both the patient and or the provider. And that's what that manufacturer should really focus on. If it were my dollars and I'm a manufacturer, I wouldn't want to spend it on the reimbursement aspect or the e-enrollment aspect or any of the technical specific components. That's very costly. Those licenses get costly. They go up every single year. There's new attributes that come out. Let that be outsourced, and you, as I would suggest, own the relationship. Those are my thoughts, Bridget.
Thank you, Jan. So we are coming up on time. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time today. Kevin and Dustin, we're interested in hearing what you have to say about this. So we will be sending an email at the end of this series that includes some of the questions we didn't get to in each episode and the answers from our panelists. So thank you all for joining us today. Again, this is part 2 of our 4-part series. So be sure to register for parts 3 and 4 from the events page on the AssisterX website. You can also view the on-demand version of the first part of the series on that same website. And lastly, our next webisode will be July 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we look forward to seeing you again then. Thank you everyone for your time.